Canada urgently needs its own version of the US Department of Government Efficiencies, or DOGE, a revolutionary initiative championed by Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Vivek Ramaswamy to cut trillions in federal waste. By dismantling bloated budgets, rooting out fraud, and eliminating unnecessary spending, DOGE embodies the kind of bold action that the Canadian government fears, and for good reason. The premise is straightforward. Governments must be held to the same efficiency and accountability standards as successful businesses. Yet, under Justin Trudeau, mismanagement, corruption, and uncontrolled waste have become systemic. A Canadian DOGE wouldn't just save billions in taxpayer dollars, it would expose the lies, incompetence, and hypocrisy keeping Trudeau's regime afloat. This video will efficiently break down the true cost of government incompetence, how tax dollars are being squandered, why our tax burden is crushing the average family, the depth of corruption infecting our institutions, and how Trudeau's reckless policies are driving us towards economic collapse. Canada needs accountability now more than ever. Canada needs a DOGE. Canada's bureaucracy is a black hole for hundreds of billions of dollars, devouring resources while crushing innovation. Endless regulations, bloated systems, and sheer mismanagement have rendered the nation a dystopia of inefficiency. Joe Carson's Diagnosis Red Tape reveals the extent of state incompetence. Governments at all levels waste 56% more resources than necessary. Charities, in contrast, are expected to cap administrative spending at 25%, while Canadian taxpayers fund a government burning through 39 cents of every tax dollar on bureaucracy. This bloated spending siphons resources from vital services, forcing Canadians to shoulder the burden of an inherently dysfunctional system. The waste is staggering. Take, for instance, the outdated policy of selling obsolete government equipment, like $2 waste baskets. By the time these items are processed, advertised, reviewed, approved, delivered, and paid for, the cost to taxpayers soars to $60 per item. You can't make this level of incompetence up. The government loses $58 in the sale of a $2 item. This absurd practice has wasted millions since the 1970s. This inefficiency plagues every sector. Healthcare costs taxpayers $344 billion annually, or $12,242 per taxpayer, while ranking dead last among developed nations. Education consumes $85 billion a year, yet delivers stagnant results and is turned into ideological indoctrination factories. The CBC consumes $1.4 billion annually, fails its performance metrics, and doubles as a government mouthpiece in an era of rampant censorship. Then there's the Canadian Pension Plan, or CPP, a glaring example of systemic mismanagement. The average Canadian contributes over $150,000 to the CPP over their lifetime and must live to the age of 82 just to break even. Had these contributions been given in an index fund with an annual 8% return, they would grow over to $1 million, 500% more than the government provides. Instead, Canadians are left with a mere 2.1% return, deprived of the chance to secure their financial futures. Canada's bureaucracy isn't merely inefficient, it's parasitic. Without bold reforms, Canadians will continue funding bloated systems that serve only themselves, leaving little for those actually footing the bill. In Canada, taxation has escalated beyond mere inconvenience. It's a full-blown crisis. As of 2023, the average Canadian family spends nearly $47,000, or 43% of their income, on taxes. That's more than the combined cost of housing, food, and clothing, which make up just 36% of their income. Since 1961, taxes have grown by an astonishing 2,705%, vastly outpacing inflation. What started as a temporary income tax in 1917 has metastasized into a monstrous system that taxes nearly every facet of life. Canadians now face federal and provincial income taxes, corporate taxes, capital gains taxes, carbon taxes, and even sin and luxury taxes. Building or buying a home means surrendering a significant portion to taxes, whether through soft costs or annual property taxes, on already taxed income. But taxation isn't just about raising revenue, it's about control. The more you earn, the more they take, not just in dollars, but in terms of ambition as well. This whole system disincentivizes productivity and punishes those who strive for success. Meanwhile, Canadians effectively work nearly half the year just to fund the government. Winston Churchill once said, "For a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle." Yet Canada continues piling on new taxes, from carbon tariffs to proposed capital gains tax on primary residences. This system is unsustainable. Canadians are being drained to fund a government incapable of managing resources responsibly. Without reform, this crushing tax burden risks undermining Canada's economic and social foundations. The Trudeau administration has perfected the art of government corruption, siphoning billions from Canadians while dismantling accountability. Consider Telesat, which received a $2.14 billion loan in taxpayer funds to provide rural high-speed internet. But there's no obligation to connect a single household in the contract, nor will they face penalties for failure. Elon Musk says Starlink could have achieved this at half the cost, but it was dismissed, not because of feasibility, but because Musk doesn't align with the government's ideological goals. The ArriveCan app scandal is another stark example of systemic corruption. Initially projected to cost $80,000, the app ultimately cost over $60 million. A significant chunk went to GC Strategies, a two-person IT staffing firm that pocketed nearly $20 million. Auditor General Karen Hogan labeled the bookkeeping the worst she's ever seen, citing a glaring disregard for basic procurement principles. The Green Slush Fund scandal reveals the depth of conflict of interest entrenched in this system. Annette Verschuren, chair of the fund, was linked to companies that received $12 million before her appointment. After assuming her role, those companies received an additional $36 million. The fund is under investigation for the misappropriation of hundreds of millions of dollars, but the government refuses to hand over documents regarding the fund, stonewalling accountability efforts. Perhaps most damning is Stephen Guilbeault's misuse of $254 million of public funds to enrich a company he owns, as alleged in the House of Commons. This isn't just about abuse of power, it's betrayal of public trust. Guilbeault's actions exemplify a government that prioritizes personal gain over public duty, eroding confidence in Canadian institutions. These scandals aren't isolated incidents. They expose a culture that rewards incompetence, tolerates conflicts of interests, and thrives on secrecy. Canadians must demand systemic reform for accountability and transparency before corruption becomes irreparable. The Trudeau government's reckless spending is sabotaging Canada's future, turning taxpayer dollars into fuel for fraud, corruption, and global appeasement. The CRA, a prime symbol of government inefficiency, recently admitted losing $40 million in a single fraud case. Since 2020, $190 million has been lost to hacked accounts, yet the agency continues downplaying its failures, instead cracking down on whistleblowers exposing this. It's no wonder Canadians feel robbed when their tax collector hands money to scammers faster than it collects it. Federal contracting fraud reveals another layer of corruption. Millions have been siphoned off through overbilling schemes, including $250,000 by one consultant alone. From 2018 to 2020, 36 departments were implicated in the misappropriation of $5 million, and this is all just likely the tip of the iceberg. But nothing compares to the absurdity of Trudeau's foreign aid spending. Since 2017, $52 billion has been funneled into international programs, with $30 billion being given under the guise of gender equity. These funds often support regimes that actively oppose these values. Afghanistan received $1.1 billion, then went on to outlaw women from speaking in public or attending school. Congo, infamous for its atrocities, received $732 million of your tax dollars. North Korea and Ethiopia, notorious for their human rights abuses, received millions more, and on goes the list. This isn't compassion, it's complicity. When Canadians struggle under oppressive tax burdens, their government sends billions to enrich warlords and corrupt elites. Trudeau's government hides behind slogans like gender equity while funding regimes that brutalize women and violate every principle Canada claims to uphold. Waste isn't an accident, it's embedded in this government. Canadians are paying the price for a system that values ideology over accountability and propaganda over results. If this culture of waste continues, Canada stands to lose not only wealth, but its moral credibility. Canada is fast approaching economic collapse, with Trudeau's government stepping on the accelerator. A projected $214 billion deficit and runaway inflation have left Canadians struggling to stay afloat. Instead of addressing these issues, the government doubles down on reckless spending, ideological policies, and disastrous central planning. This isn't mere incompetence, it's betrayal of Canadians. Frederick Hayek, in The Road to Serfdom, warned that overreach in economic planning leads to poverty and the loss of freedom, what we are currently experiencing. Trudeau's housing policies are a glaring example. Billions have been wasted on high-density housing projects, ignoring the needs of Canadian families and the housing market realities. The expected $214 billion deficit is more than a statistic. It's a sign of looming disaster. Servicing this debt will lead to crushing taxes and reduced services, pushing more Canadians into poverty. Inflation worsens the problem, turning basic necessities into luxuries, and meanwhile, the government continues to squander billions on poorly managed programs that do nothing to improve citizens' lives. This collapse isn't just probable, it's inevitable, if we don't change course. By centralizing control and rejecting free market solutions, Trudeau's government is systematically eroding Canada's economic foundations. Every wasted dollar, every failed policy, and every ideological initiative brings us closer to mass poverty. All this said, there is hope. Argentina provides a compelling example of why bold reforms are exactly what Canada needs. Javier Milei, Argentina's new president, has achieved what economists deemed impossible. In his first month in office, he slashed over 3,000 regulations, cut 50,000 government jobs, and eliminated half of all ministries. The establishment called him El Loco, or the madman, and predicted economic collapse. But the results were undeniable. Inflation dropped from 17,000% to 2.4%. The first budget surplus in decades was achieved, and the economy began to grow again. The lesson to learn from Milei is clear. Meaningful reform doesn't require decades. It requires the courage to act decisively. Milei's approach caught the attention of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. The success of Milei's methods, cutting bureaucracy, pushing reforms to the limit, and refusing to compromise with corruption, is now being studied as a model for the Department of Government Efficiency in America. This is exactly the kind of courage Canada needs. A Canadian DOGE under the right leadership would not only cut through the inefficiencies and corruption embedded in our system, but it would also bring transparency and accountability back. The urgency is palpable, as waste and corruption under Trudeau have spiraled out of control. But there is still hope as long as we have the courage for bold action. Canadians must reject ideological policies and embrace pragmatic solutions that prioritize long-term stability. Without this shift, Canada's road to economic collapse will only accelerate. The time to act is now, before the cost becomes irreversible.